My name is Wanda Krause. I am program head of the Global Leadership Program. It's a program at Royal Roads University in the School of Leadership that has a blended program and an on-campus program. And within those two programs, we have also several different options, ranging from a master's in global leadership, which is a 2-year program, or with an option of a 13-month program. As well, we have diplomas and certificates in both streams. So whether you want to study on campus here in Victoria, BC, or you would like to begin your studies in a blended format. For this fall, with the uncertainty that COVID-19 obviously brings for everyone around the world, we will begin, however, online for both programs. So whether you're on the on-campus stream or track or the blended, you'll be joining everyone together online. I am absolutely honored to have 3 really insightful thought leaders on a really important topic today. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to host this webinar on such an important topic. Obviously, the Global Leadership Program seeks to address numerous global challenges. And in my opinion, food security is one of the top on my list for addressing globally. Today, we have 3 panelists. We'll begin with Brenda Shope. Brenda, being a thought leader in Canada with global experience in food systems, joins us today and will speak first. As a graduate of the MA in Global Leadership here at Royal Roads, she brings a wealth of knowledge from the program and as well a wealth of knowledge from her experience globally. She will focus more specifically on the broken links in food security from obviously a global perspective. And it's the global perspective we really try to bring into this webinar to illustrate how we can address such a wicked problem, such a massive challenge that's global, in ways in which we see many analysts don't do. Given that food security is such a massive issue and it's increasing, what we see is approaches and ways of addressing this challenge that don't necessarily see how we're totally interconnected because it's such a crisis, and really approaches are, for the most part, short-sighted in trying to address wicked problems more immediately. So Brenda is a coach, a mentor. She's an award-winning author, and she'll share her thoughts on the regeneration and social construction of food systems. Then she'll also discuss a vision for global leaders in food. And then we will have Rebecca Mckenzie. Rebecca is a current student in the Global Leadership Program and works through the Culinary Tourism Alliance to ensure culinary tourism is a meaningful and sustainable contributor to local economies in destinations worldwide. She'll also share her leadership together with the other 2 panelists and thinking and vision. So her approach to recovery through a taste of place, and the measures that she, together with the CTA, the Culinary Tourism Alliance, are taking to build back better with their hyper-local campaign, which she'll describe. Catherine Edmaski is the director of the School of Leadership Studies at Royal Roads University with us, and she'll also offer examples of innovation needed to address this complex and interconnected challenge. So we draw on the wisdom, expertise, and global leadership of 3 wonderful panelists today. And so with that, I will invite Brenda to speak. Thank you, Brenda, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Wanda, and hello, everyone. I was traveling in New Zealand and I had taken a photograph of barrels of apples by the road. And as I spent the next couple years then working in the developing world, in developing countries, I had these pictures on my iPad and I would show them to individuals because they were curious. And they always said, "Oh, look at all that food." They did not say, "Look at those apples." So what I saw as a snack that was affordable and storable, someone else saw as center of plate and the source of many, many meals. And it just helped me with my lens in how I look at the world. And the world is a funny place right now. We actually have more than enough food to feed everyone. What we don't have is a globalized or a modernized global system. What we don't have is a functioning system that can actually deliver on the promise of access to food for all. And what we don't have is universal appreciation of food as a right. Most certainly, farmers have done their part. Since 1960, they have doubled their production on per unit of land. And again, between 2000 and 2018, they doubled global grain production. They doubled global meat production. They increased value add for food production by 67%, all while losing 80 million hectares of land to urbanization. And at that same period of time, we saw a fundamental shift happen in the world. In 2014, the global economy stalled. And for the first time, we got a glimpse of moving from a globalized mindset to a national, regional, local one. In other words, we were ready to shorten the food supply chain. But it was costly to some. In developing countries, nearly 1/5 of investment in food systems was terminated. The result has been that we now have 1 in 4 persons on Earth that are moderately food insecure, and we're seeing hunger at levels we haven't seen since 2010. There's no normalcy in hunger. If someone is hungry, it is because the food system and the political system has failed them. And these examples show us that the production of food is not tied to the availability of it. We have more than enough. So the question is, where's the food? Well, some of it is lost through behavior. In Canada, as an example where I live, nearly 50% of food is wasted at the plate, which means it's wasted after it's purchased at the restaurant, at the dinner table. It's a $49 billion bill in a country that's the 5th largest exporter of agricultural commodities. And yet our food insecurity is very high at 1 in 7 persons. In other areas of the world, such as East Africa, food waste occurs directly post-harvest. So we have an infrastructure issue, the lack of markets, the lack of transportation, the lack of roadways, and most certainly the lack of storage. And there's a lot of studies being done around the world that tie storage to prosperity within a nation. But addressing that alone would feed another 400 million people. From a leadership perspective, there's so many areas to work in because, as Wanda indicated, there are quite a few broken linkages. And one area that a lot of people might not think about is financial. The Global Food Index has indicated that the single largest contributor to a nation's food security is its farmers' ability to access funding. And so financial literacy is something that's critically important. And I've been working on financial literacy in K to all the way through the curriculum system for many years now after doing my Nuffield work, developing global mentorship programs for women and girls, and realizing that at every juncture, the most important thing we do is have not only access to finance and capital, but the financial literacy and the literacy to go with it. And in the environment, with water, we have and soil issues. Less than 2% of the Earth's surface has fresh water on it. We are at a situation where at peak water. And most certainly I've seen amazing catchment and water replenishing systems around the world. But we tend to interfere a little bit too much in water. And a prime example is the Fertile Crescent, where the marshes were drained to flush out opposing troops. And that basically decimated 12,000 years of agricultural production in history. And on soil, with less than 7% of the world's surface being arable, in other words, it can grow a crop, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on farmers because Canada included, over 40% of farmland is on a short-term lease. So that changes behavior. It puts a lot of pressure on people to get as much as they can out of that land. And it's highly disruptive to the food system. And in peacekeeping, you know, in areas where there's conflict and land is contaminated, up to 50% of land is lost. And it's extraordinarily hard for those countries to become food sovereign again after such interruption in the land base. We've often heard that you can't have peace without food, but nor can you have food without peace. In all things and in all places, we look at the preservation of dignity in our leadership walk. And I was once asked by one of the largest food companies in the world this question: how do we, Brenda, build communities while increasing food production? And I answered it this way: you don't build communities. Communities are built by the people and the talent and the gifts within them. Your job is to remember you're the guest and to hold fast to the promises and the commitment that you make. I've been very fortunate in my career and in my capstone to work with global leaders in food around the world, in developing and developed nations, in North and South, in every link in the food chain. And I'd like to share with you some of their traits. I found them to be deeply caring individuals. This is food that we're talking about. And they're so frustrated that they themselves can't deliver on that promise of access to food for all. They also understand that a system is the people within it. And so they're determined to invite diversity and ignite curiosity and to nurture growth within everyone on their teams and all the stakeholders. And they also recognize, and we've had so much discussion around the table lately on this shift from this globalized drive to this more national, this more centered drive of shortening the food supply chain, that it's going to take collaboration like we've never seen in food systems before. At the end of the day, it's all about building resilient communities or having resilient communities build themselves. Because if you think about it, every single food system starts at the community level. And perhaps a nice way to wrap up this short conversation is to use a quote from my upcoming book, 3 Times a Day, Leadership to Feed Our World. And it was shared with me from a person in a developing country, food leader who focuses on urban agriculture. And they said, food is the economic, social, health, ecological, cultural, community, and justice connector. So we look forward to connecting with all of you through food and to have you at our leadership table. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you, Brenda. I will introduce Rebecca Mckenzie. Rebecca's again a current student of the MA Global Leadership Program and has contributed her expertise in a number of different ways, including to a variety of industry boards, including the United Nations World Tourism Organization's Gastroeconomic Tourism Network. Rebecca, you can have
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wanda. I appreciate the introduction, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. I would like to start by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. And I'd like to pay tribute to the legacy of the First Peoples of Canada and accept my responsibility to honor all my relations and recognize the great work that the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada, the Indigenous Culinary of Associated Nations, and Indigenous Tourism Ontario are doing across the country to help to elevate Indigenous foodways. In my role as President and CEO of the Culinary Tourism Alliance, an organization that I've been with since its inception, we certainly address a lot of complex issues around food and can build upon many examples that Brenda actually mentioned in her presentation. As a not-for-profit organization, our vision is for culinary tourism to be recognized as a meaningful and sustainable contributor to local economies in destinations worldwide. And our mission is to bridge the gap between the food and drink and tourism industries across Canada and around the globe. Our work falls into three different categories. And Selena, if you could just move to the next slide, what I'm going to share with you is we are a membership-based organization. So we work with businesses across the culinary tourism value chain to bridge that gap. And when we're talking about the value chain in food tourism, it starts with the base ingredient, the farmers, the fishermen, the wineries, the craft breweries, the artisan cheese producers. We incorporate farmers markets, and then food service experiences, everything from food trucks to fine dining, accommodations through the lens of their food and beverage offering, attractions either through on-site food and beverage offering or through taste of place education that they may offer, and certainly festivals and events, culinary tours, and cooking classes, all ways that a consumer can immerse themselves and places that consumers can immerse themselves through taste of place. While our membership base is Ontario, we do work across the globe, and I'm going to share more with you a little bit about our Great Taste of Ontario program in future slides. But we do have two sort of channels in terms of how we engage a consumer audience is through ontarioculinary.com, and then through business to business and industry through culinarytourismalliance.com. The next slide, I'm going to speak to you about a program that's very unique to Canada. And it is right now the only food service certification program that audits restaurants here in Ontario based on their procurement of Ontario grown and raised ingredients. And so we follow the definition of local that the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs has through their Foodland program. So anything grown and or raised in the province, and if it is a processed product, the primary ingredient must be grown and or raised here in Ontario. It's through this program that we established back in 2013, working really closely with industry and looking at comparative programs globally, and then launching to consumers in 2014, that we recognize not only restaurants that are committed to significant sourcing and celebrating of Ontario food and drink, but we connect them with growers and producers who have the capacity to increase sales into the food service industry, while also providing education and further networking to help them really do better and do more to showcase our taste of place. Really, the end goal here is not only to increase consumer awareness of local products, but also into the food service sector and support the supply and value chains while also encouraging sustainable practices behind them in order to help build our local food culture here in Ontario. Some of the key issues that we're bringing up and have brought up over the last couple of years and continue to work with is to create programs to help the food service and hospitality industry look at ways they can change their operations to address key issues such as living wages in the industry, certainly to look at food waste, and that's a significant part of the work that we do to support the restaurants in helping them to not only recognize where that waste is, but how they can do better and do more to reduce it. And then, encouraging them not only to buy local, but to where possible, when possible, buy organic and products from regenerative farms. So incorporating a number of the sustainable development goals into the programs that we create is imperative. And we do that through this program. And I'll share a little bit more with you moving forward about how we're doing that through our Great Taste of Ontario. The sort of third area that we focus on, and if Selena could just take me to the next slide, that would be great, is as I mentioned, we believe that food tourism and culinary tourism development are community experiences, and through social enterprise consultancy within the Culinary Tourism Alliance, we work with communities of all shapes and sizes to develop culinary tourism, with most of our work involving research and strategizing about how to best leverage the histories, heritage, and cultures behind the food and drink of each destination, and that makes it unique, and how to build upon that, not only in terms of building capacity in destinations, but increasing the amount of partnerships and the ability for businesses along the culinary tourism value chain to work in co-opetition. So as an example, we just completed a series with the Tourism Industry Association of Canada through their Elevating Canadian Experience program, and developed workshops and tools that are open and accessible to operators across the country, literally from coast to coast to coast, teaching destinations not only how to elevate their experience, but also addressing the opportunity for growth in agritourism, as well as partnership development, and addressing some of the key trends that are going to be coming out of COVID. And so if we could just move to the next slide, this really speaks to what the future of culinary tourism looks like and how it can actually help us in supporting a more sustainable food system, recognizing that many of us, when lockdown came, we turned inward into our kitchens. Flour and toilet paper were hard to find and come by, and many people took up interesting pastimes such as learning how to grow their own mushrooms, and certainly gardening took a boom. And what we see in tourism is when we can return to travel, and we're not there yet, but hopefully we will be at some point this year, that visitors are really seeking that human connection, and they are, that we are thinking and rethinking about our food systems, and the ability to inform and encourage visitation at a hyper local level, and then certainly more provincially and nationally, will be a great opportunity to help move and inform change in our behaviors that may support more vibrant and sustainable food systems. Certainly, it really is about connecting visitors to place, and there is a rise in experiential tourism where people do want to not only go and visit, but they want to feel like their visit has had a positive impact on place. And in fact, in many cases, they're looking to learn and to take away those experiences and share them with others. Of course, culinary tourism is a multi-sensory experience. So we work with many different segments of tourism to talk about where food and drink can be embedded into the experience, because it will only elevate the experience further. There is, of course, only one thing every visitor to a destination does at least 3 times a day, likely more, and that's eat and drink. And more importantly, that's where connections are made to place. And so it's with this in mind that we created last year. And as Wanda mentioned, I'm a current student in the MA for Global Leadership, just kicking off my capstone project. So please wish me luck. But it's in this course, in this program, that's really inspired me, all of the learning to really figure out how in recovery we could create a program that would look at this complex system and see where, tourism could actually have a more positive effect in change around our food system. So we created the Great Taste of Ontario program. It's the largest recovery program in the province. There's over 90 investing partners in the program, including destination marketing organizations, regional tourism organizations, sector organizations, medias, and charity, and funding from both the federal government in tourism, as well as provincially from tourism sports, Ministry of Tourism, Sport, Heritage and Culture, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So the program is really designed to push Ontarians to rediscover the province and fall in love with our province again, and really boost regional economies by not only increasing tourism visits in the right time, so addressing some of our key issues right now around overcapacity in rural destinations, so a focus on shoulder season and midweek, while also really identifying key issues in urban centers where recovery is actually going to be much more challenging over time. The success of this program is really dependent on the unique mix of the destination development, the market readiness training, the procurement tracking, and the strategic marketing initiatives. So as part of the program, we actually created some training modules for not only the destinations that are invested, but the hundreds, actually over 1,000 businesses that are in the program, encouraging them to achieve the safe travel stamp, showing the consumer that they're adhering to the highest level of safety protocols, and then really working to increase that collaboration between the agriculture and hospitality sector by creating very specific criteria for the destinations who are participating in this program, and the types of content that we're creating that really is about showcasing all of the businesses along the culinary tourism value chain. So what we've done is there's going to be, when it goes live again, and could be June, could be July. We'll wait and see how things go here in Ontario. There's passports that we've created. Right now, there's over 70 passports in the system. And these passports are gamified, and they enable the visitor to download the passport. And then when they go in market, it will automatically check them into the businesses that include going to visit farms and learning about our foodways, and staying at accommodations that celebrate taste of place, and eating at restaurants that are Feast on certified. The points are actually going to be redeemed and can be, the consumer can then use them for purchasing made in Ontario products. They can also get gift certificates to Feast on certified restaurants. And more importantly, we're also using this platform to talk about food security and food access, recognizing that there will be many Ontarians that can't travel and are actually really struggling to feed themselves in these challenging times. And so we've created some strategic partnerships with Food Share, as well as Second Harvest. And the loyalty points can be redeemed for cash donations to both organizations. And we've made a minimum commitment of $20,000 a year during the program to support both of those organizations, but more importantly, use our marketing platforms to talk about food security and food access. In addition, during the program, we recognize that there's a lot of room to grow a more representation of diversity in our marketing and our efforts in promoting the true culinary cultural diversity that exists here in Ontario. So we have been developing a culinary cultural diversity program, and created not only some wonderful partnerships to help work with those businesses that are operated by members of the BIPOC or LGBT community, but also so that we can use this opportunity to help elevate their story and showcase them, but also create some tools to help destination marketing organizations learn how to do a better job of engaging with these business operators and showcasing them within their own localized initiatives. So the criteria for businesses to be in these various programs and subsequent itineraries that are going to be created seasonally is to really put a preference and look to for those destinations to showcase those businesses owned and operated by BIPOC and LGBT, that they represent a unique culinary diversity to their region. For example, it could be Tibetan food in Parkdale or Italian food in Windsor. They need to be making considerable efforts, all of the businesses, to sourcing Ontario grown and raised products, and working with small to medium-sized business operators. And we are asking them to really think about showcasing those businesses that are practicing either regenerative farming, organic farming, or sustainable, supporting sustainable fishing and aquaculture. There's a number of wineries that are sustainably certified here in the province, so showcasing those, showcasing our farmers markets. And we've created strategic partnerships with the Canadian LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Black Chamber of Commerce, and Indigenous Tourism Ontario, to name a few, as well as working with folks at SAO Francophone Ontario and key partners in the industry through festivals and events and attractions. So when I listened to Brenda's presentation, and I was thinking about all of the key touch points that she talked about, I realized, and I've realized this for a long time, that culinary tourism is often, I think, confused by many in that it's just a tourism activity, when in fact, if culinary tourism development is done properly, it's a community development process. And it really is about fostering relationships with people from place, and helping them to truly understand the treasures that they have and how they can protect those treasures, starting from the ground up. Certainly, while I think some of this momentum may have happened in absence of my my MA, I will say that the skills that I've gained have been significant, as I've played a key role in advocacy, sitting on a number of provincial tourism task force for both the restaurant industry and the craft alcohol industry, and now looking at addressing some policies nationally to help support the growth of agritourism. There's a lot of policy and regulation that needs to be addressed, both federally as well as provincially and municipally. And we've been working with great partners like the Chef's Manifesto through the SDG Advocacy Hub. And most recently, I've joined the UNWTO SDG Working Group. So it's through the lens of this complex system and understanding that there's so much more than just the tourism end piece, but really that grassroots work that needs to happen, and the supports that need to be there for the small to medium-sized businesses across the value chain, that will see this type of work be successful, and hopefully not only informing consumers and changing their behavior, but supporting the businesses to do better and do more to support a more resilient food system. I could go on for quite some time, but I won't, because I know we have another presenter, because we could talk about the actual shocks, but certainly it's significant, the number of shocks that we saw the minute the restaurant industry closed, and it went right back to the farm. So I look forward to the rest of the conversation, and certainly welcome any questions towards the end. And I hope that this has whet your appetite, pun intended, to learn more about culinary tourism as a way to support sustainable food systems. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Both presentations are so informative and build on each other, so thank you for that. We'll move now to Catherine Manske, Director of the School of Leadership. The floor is yours, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Wanda. And wow, Rebecca and Brenda, what great presentations. I'm just so inspired to hear more about what you're working on. And I really liked this term co-opetition. That's not one that I'm very familiar with, Rebecca. So thank you for that little concept, I guess, to expand a small concept with a big implication. So thank you for that. I'm going to share a PowerPoint slide here. So just bear with me for a moment as I bring that up. And I think, are you all able to see that now? You could give me a nod. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So colleagues and friends, I am so delighted to be here with you today. As Wanda said, my name is Catherine Edmaski, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the School of Leadership Studies. These days, I don't always get to hear the details of what students are working on. So it's fun to be in a place like this where I can start to hear a bit more about what our students are working on. And I too gratefully acknowledge the lands and waterways of the Kusapsum and Lekwungen families and ancestors on which I live, work, and play. And a few years ago, I edited a book called Food Leadership, Leadership in Adult Learning for Global Food Systems Transformation. And wrote a couple of chapters in it myself, and then also curated the work from various different kinds of food leaders, food scholars, food educators from 4 different countries around the world. And it turned out that 3 of the contributors were focused specifically on Indigenous food sovereignty. And so there are, there are a number of different topics that both Brenda and Rebecca have mentioned so far. And there are many, many more. Just as a brief, shall we say, overview of what this book entails, I can say that, as you already know, food is so much more than simply a necessity, simply a staple. It has so many different cultural, socio-ecological, economic implications. It's an entry point into many different kinds of conversations about culture and tradition, health and well-being, small and large scale business, as Rebecca was mentioning, with the tourism industry and even wineries, etc. Ecology, politics, science, and the arts. Poverty and social justice, as we heard a lot from Brenda in particular. Land use, as we heard from Brenda. Civil society, global trade systems, and of course, traditional ecological knowledge. And many, many more. I'll say that list is not exhaustive. But food gives us a doorway into these kinds of conversations. And so I would like to suggest that from seed to table to the landfill or the compost heap, the policies and practices related to all aspects of the food cycle create rich sites for learning and multiple opportunities for leadership at the local and global levels. So the book itself documents many different examples of the innovation needed to address this increasingly complex and interconnected socioeconomic and environmental challenges associated with food and agriculture. And just as Wanda said in her introduction, food is becoming such an increasingly important topic at a global scale. And yet many case studies about leadership tend to focus on business leaders or maybe social movement leaders. We have a few key people who might come to mind when we say global leaders. But what I would like to invite of you, all of the listeners here today, is to think about leadership from the perspective of your plate. Look to your plate, and by extension, look to the people who grow the food and all of the different channels that that food takes to arrive on your plate. And look to nature itself as a source of inspiration for food, leadership, and learning. That's a basic overview of what this book entails. What I'd like to do with my few minutes with you today, if you look, oh, sorry, excuse me, I've just clicked through, but if you minimize on your own screen, if you go out of full screen mode, you should be able to see the chat coming up. And I would like to invite all of you. You've heard from Brenda, you've heard from Rebecca, you've heard a few words from me. I would like to encourage all of you to think about food systems and how the growing, processing, transportation, consumption, and waste management of food at a global scale, how does this contribute to the climate crisis we're currently in? Let's start to tease out the different elements of this, what we call wicked challenge or wicked problem of the global agricultural system. So if you start to minimize, if you minimize your screen, that should bring the chat up for you. And I'd like to see, good, I'm seeing a couple of comments coming up because I'm in full screen mode. I'm not able to read what you're writing, but I'd love to see a few more comments starting to pop up in the chat. Monoculture, there we go. Thank you, Niels. Monoculture, the use of pesticides and fertilizers. Yes. Any other ideas? Yes. Waste. Yes. Conventional farming. Eating. Yeah. Eating locally grown reduces the transportation waste. Yes. Transportation of foods from afar. Yes. 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 Wonderful. Thank you. Loss of topsoil. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Now we see this cascading effect of chat messages starting to come in. Thank you. Wonderful comments. So as you're continuing to think about just as I said, food is this entry point into so many different kinds of conversations. And so we can see there are impacts on people, on animals, on the earth. Rebecca was talking a little bit about how some of the businesses she identified, how they treat, how do we actually treat people who work in food and agricultural systems? Are there inequities based on displacement of peoples from their lands? How is the security, the job security? What about migrant labor? What about dumping of subsidized grains in the global south? I think somebody in the chat earlier mentioned the food waste that happens after a harvest. What about laws and regulations that privilege some farmers over others? And we're seeing major protests in India. I know that the spotlight right now is on the rising COVID cases. However, not very long ago at all, we were seeing major farmer protests across India. Of course, there's a legacy of slavery through monocropping and a lot of plantations, COVID outbreaks, et cetera, et cetera. I've got this, again, is not an exhaustive list, but it starts to give you a little bit of insight into this interconnected and very complex system that we're working in. The list goes on. And just to give you a couple, Brenda gave some very powerful statistics, but just to offer a couple of more: global industrial agriculture and the global transport of food produced, this was suggested 20% of the world's greenhouse gases come from agriculture and use up 80% of the planet's water. So these are some major significant numbers when we're looking at the impact of agriculture. And likewise, the UN has been calling for just a fundamental shift, a paradigm shift in the way that we need to conduct ourselves in the agricultural sector. That was from 2013 at least. That was the source that I found recently, but probably even before that, people have been calling for a change in the way that we do things. So because I don't have too much time with you today, I'd just like to give a general overview of someone named Paul Kack's work on food leaders. He offered a matrix of different ways that we can understand food leaders who are working within this sector. And I'm so proud of Brenda and Rebecca's work, who would be considered food leaders under this matrix, people who are working to move change forward and come up with innovative ways that we can actually address some of these wicked interconnected challenges that we've already mentioned. So of course, there are the formal and the informal educators and researchers. Brenda and Rebecca would be two of these, but also local farmers. Farmers themselves are educating the next generation of workers who come to their farms, of interns. They're speaking to people at farmers markets. There's all kinds of different ways that they are serving as informal educators. And then there are visionary leaders, and at the end of my presentation, I will share one of them with you. But there are many people who are articulating a compelling vision that a more sustainable food system is possible. And then there are the innovators who take that vision and they're able to actually start to apply it in practice. And Rebecca told us about a few examples of those in the work that she's doing in Ontario. And then there are the mobilizers and the networkers. So these are the people who are doing the organizing work, who are taking the vision and who are taking the practices, and they're doing the community development work to raise awareness at a broader scale and get new policies passed, new laws passed, new systems in place to actually move change forward. And then, of course, this is what Paul Kack says, there are the domain-based leaders. So these are people who do not work in food and agriculture at all. These are people who, no matter their position, perhaps they're doctors, perhaps they're religious leaders, and they too use that position of authority to remind people that food is also important in whatever it is that they're doing. If they're doctors, they're talking about the health implication. If they're religious leaders, they might be talking about some of the more spiritual or justice-oriented impacts of the food system. And so there are many, many different ways in which one can be a food leader. And with the final few minutes that I have to share with you today, I'd like to offer some words. Vandana Shiva, Dr. Vandana Shiva, in conversation with Bill Moyers, she can speak to her own vision much more articulately than I could paraphrase her words. And so I'd like to offer you just a short clip from Vandana Shiva. And the reason I've chosen this particular clips of the many, if you just do a search on her name, you'll be able to find probably thousands of videos online that you could find from her. But let me tell you the reason why I chose this particular clip. When we start to look at how complex the food system is, it can sometimes feel insurmountable. It can feel like, it can almost feel hopeless. Where do I even begin? And she offers in this clip a few wise words about what our duty is, our duty to try to move change forward, regardless of whether it feels hopeless. And so I'd like to offer you this clip, and I'd like to offer as well that if you look a little bit more deeply into Dr. Vandana Shiva's work, you'll see that she focuses on the small. She focuses on seed. So drawing from, many of you will have heard of Gandhi, of course, and how Gandhi led the salt marches and led, in a sense, a revolution in India where they were looking to the small. They were looking to khadi, this woven cotton that people could do within their own homes. They could make their own clothing in the context of global textile trade and, you know, this colonial relationship, exporting silks and saris and so on to the UK and beyond. Gandhi was calling people to look to the local, look at what you can do yourself. And so following in Gandhi's footsteps, Vandana Shiva is saying, look at what you can do yourself. The seed is within our control. It's something small, it's something local, it's something that every one of us can do. As Rebecca said, gardening took on a boom during the COVID pandemic. Each one of us has the capacity to plant a seed. So in just these final few moments, I know we're close to the end of our time, I'd like to offer this video of Dr. Vandana Shiva. Let me share with you. Just give me 1 moment here, my friends. Okay, here we go.
Vandana Shiva founded India's Navdanya movement to promote the use of native seeds, and she's become a formidable figure in all these battles. Trained in physics, she's an activist and prolific author whose books include Earth Democracy, Soil Not Oil, Water Wars, and her latest, Making Peace with the Earth. I talked with her again recently when she came to New York to be honored by Union Theological Seminary. Welcome back.
Wonderful to be back with you, Ben.
It's an uphill battle you're waging. How do you keep doing it? What drives you, really?
You know, we have this very beautiful text in India, well, the Gita.
Bhagavad Gita?
The Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
And there's a very simple lesson that Krishna gives, that you do not measure the fruit of your action. You have to measure your obligation for action. You have to find out what's the right thing to do. That is your duty. Whether you win or lose is not the issue. The obligation to do the right thing. For me, you know, I've grown up as an ecologist and a nature lover from my very childhood. And for me, the diversity of species, their intrinsic value, their integrity is vital. The rights of our farmers to be able to have seed, the most fundamental source of a livelihood in a poor country. 80% of the food of the world is even today produced by those small farmers of the kind that we have in India. Our small farmers are feeding 1.2 billion Indians. We forget the scale of what smallness means multiplied many times, because we've got used to the dinosaur mentality. We only see the big. We forget that dinosaurs go extinct.
All right. Well, I think that ending on Dr. Vandana Shiva's words is probably one of the most, for me at least, one of the most inspiring ways that we can end a conversation on global food systems transformation and global leadership. So over to you, Wanda, to close us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was amazing. We are almost at time, so I will choose for the question and answer period, the very first question that was posed. And that was by Alejandra, which is your perspective about this sustainable and interconnected perspective of tourism? I believe that was addressed to Rebecca, but all three panelists, you're welcome to provide your insights into that. And then there are second parts to that question, but I think we'll begin with that. And I think the second part perhaps as well is quite relevant, where we can understand and try to perhaps strategize that international acceptance or understanding of such approaches, if you want to comment on that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess what I would say is that the challenge around meeting the Sustainable Development Goals is largely making sure that there's resources to incentivize, to educate and incentivize change at the operator level. More recently, I came across a really great tool that B Corp, along with UN Compact, created, the SDG Action Manager, which is a free tool that any business or organization can use to understand the baseline of where they meet the SDGs, and helps you to identify the gaps. So it's a primer for those who may be interested in getting B Corp certified, which of course there's about 400 businesses, I think, in Canada that are B Corp certified, and 4,000 globally. The big piece here is to get the mindset and the measurement of tourism changed at national levels, because right now the mindset for tourism is all based on the economic impact and measurement of visitation through overnight stays. And so even as we come into recovery out of COVID, many governments are going to be challenged with how they address tourism moving forward, because they are going to have to be looking at very hyper local markets as opposed to global markets that they may have been appealing to previously. And this is where, part of the work that we're doing is making sure that agriculture and tourism are connected with local economic development, to understand that we need to change the lens in which we measure success in tourism. And we need to take this opportunity to shift behavior and to leverage some behavioral changes that have come out of COVID, and to show some best practices of operators who've been able to, I'm sorry to use the word pivot, because I know it's been used ad nauseum, but really those who've been able to pivot well. So I'll just give you one example. There's 100-kilometer foods here in Ontario, they are all Ontario local food distributor, B Corp certified. Their focus was about bringing Ontario products into the restaurant industry. COVID hit, they lost their entire market. And the way that you take food from a farmer to a restaurant is very different from how you take food from a farmer to direct to a consumer's home or to retail grocery. And so they had to very quickly figure out how to change. They created a whole online market. They now do direct delivery to home, while still supporting all those farmers who all of a sudden went, oh my gosh, where's our market for our food is disappeared. And yes, some could had the benefit of being able to have on-farm market or their own online sales, but they relied so heavily on 100-kilometer. So this is massive shift, but they've done it, and they've done it well. So we need to show examples and share with more communities examples of those types of businesses that will help to affect change. And they're just one piece of the complex culinary tourism value chain.
But I'll hand it over very quickly to Selena Kunar to talk about our surprise giveaway.
A slide put up here, and you might want to take a quick look at it, because it's a hint for a giveaway question. So Brenda and Rebecca are some of our wonderful learners here at Royal Roads University. Can anyone remember what program they participated in here at Royal Roads? There we go. We have our 3 winners. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for playing along with us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.